Grandma, I want to tell you something very terrible about my parents. Her small voice shook, but her eyes were steady, older than 6 years should ever have to be. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. 20 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled into the driveway of the house I had paid for with my own retirement savings. And when the officers walked through that front door, they were not there to protect my son. They were there to arrest him. My name is Eleanor Whitfield, though everyone who has ever loved me calls me Nora, and I am 71 years old. I want to tell you who I was before that Tuesday afternoon, because you need to understand exactly what was thrown away and exactly what it cost to get it back. I have found, in the months since, that people want to sort this story into simple categories: victim and villain, innocent and guilty. And I understand the impulse, because simple categories are comforting when the truth is this jagged. But I did not live a simple story, and I will not tell it to you as one. I lived a long, ordinary life first, full of grocery lists and church potlucks and a husband I loved for 11 years before I lost him. And only then did that ordinary life collide with something none of my ordinary years had prepared me for. I tell you that so you understand. This is not a story about a woman who was always strong. It is a story about a woman who became strong exactly when she needed to, because the alternative was unthinkable, and because somewhere along the way, I decided unthinkable was no longer a place I was willing to live. I spent 42 years as a school nurse in Millbrook, Ohio, patching up scraped knees and quietly noticing the children nobody else noticed. The ones with bruises they explained too carefully, the ones who ate their free lunch like it might be their only meal that day. I raised one son, Daniel, alone, after his father died in a warehouse accident when Daniel was 9 years old. There was no life insurance worth mentioning. There was a mortgage, a car that needed a transmission, and a boy who needed shoes every few months because he would not stop growing. I worked double shifts. I clipped coupons before clipping coupons was something people posted about online. I did not complain, because complaining does not pay a mortgage, and because I had decided, somewhere around Daniel's 10th birthday, that my son would never know how close we came to losing everything. He did not know. That was the whole design of my life for 30 years. That Daniel would grow up believing the floor beneath him was solid, even when I was the only thing holding it up. When Daniel married Priya 12 years ago, I welcomed her the way I would have welcomed a daughter I had prayed for. She was sharp, funny, ambitious in a way that reminded me of myself at that age, and for the first several years, I believed, truly believed, that my son had built the life I had sacrificed to give him. Then Lily was born, and I loved that child before I had ever seen her face, the way you love a grandchild before you have any right to, purely on the promise of her. I want to be precise about what I gave, because precision is the only language that makes a betrayal impossible to argue with. When Daniel and Priya lost their restaurant investment in 2019, a wine bar downtown that failed within 14 months, I gave them $22,000 from my retirement account to cover the lease default so they would not be sued. When Priya was between jobs for 8 months in 2021, I paid their mortgage directly, $1,850 a month, for the full 8 months. That is $14,800. When Lily needed braces, I paid the $6,200 orthodontist bill in full, in cash, because Daniel said insurance would only cover half, and he did not want Lily to feel like a burden. When their car broke down beyond repair 2 years ago, I co-signed a loan for a used minivan, and when 3 payments were missed, it was my credit that took the damage, not theirs. I am not reciting this to boast of my generosity. I am reciting it because every single dollar of it will matter later, and because a woman my age learns quickly that memory alone is not evidence. Receipts are evidence. I kept every receipt. There is a particular kind of arithmetic that lives in the mind of a woman who raised a child alone after burying her husband too young. You learn to count in a way other people never have to. I counted diapers against my paycheck. I counted the miles on my car against the cost of a new transmission versus 1 more year of prayer that the old one would hold. When Daniel was 11, I remember standing in the frozen food aisle of the Kroger on Route 9, holding a bag of chicken thighs in one hand and a calculator in the other, doing the silent math of whether I could afford both the chicken and the field trip fee due that Friday. I chose the field trip. I always chose the field trip. Daniel never once knew we had chicken thighs for dinner 4 nights running that week because I told him I simply preferred rice, and he believed me, because why would a child doubt his own mother's preference for rice? I tell you this, not out of self-pity, but because it explains something essential about who I became and why what happened later cut as deep as it did. I did not build a comfortable life by accident or by luck. I built it the way a woman builds a stone wall. One carried rock at a time, over years, with her own 2 hands, while everyone around her assumed the wall had simply always been there. When Daniel graduated high school and told his friends his mother always managed to make things work, he said it with pride, and I let him keep that pride, because a mother's love sometimes means letting your child believe the floor was never as thin as it truly was. By the time Daniel married Priya, my retirement account held just over $210,000. Modest by some standards, but every cent of it representing 4 decades of a nurse's salary, careful investing, and a level of self-denial I had stopped noticing because it had simply become the shape of my life. I did not deny myself luxuries because I was miserly. I denied myself luxuries because I remembered, with total clarity, exactly what it felt like to hold a calculator in a grocery aisle and choose between chicken and a field trip fee. And I had promised myself, somewhere in that aisle, that I would never again be a woman without a cushion beneath her. For the first several years, I did not notice anything wrong, because love makes you slow to see what strangers would spot in an instant. The first thing I noticed, the pattern, the small thing that later I would replay 100 times in my mind, was that Lily stopped running to the door when I visited. She used to fling herself at my knees the moment I stepped inside, still in her socks, laughing before I had even said hello. Somewhere around her 6th birthday, that stopped. She would wait in the hallway. She would watch her mother's face before she smiled at me, the way a dog watches its owner's hand before deciding whether to come closer. I told myself she was growing up. 6-year-olds get shy sometimes. That is what I told myself, because the alternative explanation was one I was not ready to hold. The second thing I noticed was smaller still. Lily began flinching at raised voices. Not screaming, just ordinary raised voices, the kind that happen in every household when someone is looking for their car keys. She would go very still, the way small animals go still when a hawk's shadow crosses the yard. I mentioned it once to Priya, gently, the way you mention something you are hoping will be explained away. "She's just sensitive," Priya said, not looking up from her phone. "Some kids are sensitive." And I let it go, because I wanted to let it go. Because believing your son has built a good and gentle home is easier than believing he has not. There was a third small thing before the money, and I have gone back to it so many times since that I could recite it in my sleep. Lily had a stuffed rabbit, worn gray from washing, that she carried everywhere for the first 4 years of her life. One Sunday, she arrived at my house without it, and when I asked where Mr. Buttons had gone, she said, very quickly and very quietly, "Mommy said I'm too old for it now." And then she changed the subject to a cartoon she'd watched, the way children change the subject when they have learned that certain subjects cause trouble. I thought nothing of it at the time, beyond a small ache in my chest, the ordinary ache of watching a grandchild grow up faster than you'd like. It was only much later that I understood Mr. Buttons had not been retired. He had been taken away as a punishment for wetting the bed during one of the nights she would later describe to me, and that the quickness in her voice that Sunday had been fear dressed up as nonchalance, a skill no 6-year-old should have to possess. The fourth thing was a school incident I did not learn about until months afterward, when I finally spoke with Lily's 2nd grade teacher, a patient woman named Miss Renwick, who had, it turned out, filed 2 separate internal concern notes with the school counselor over the course of that year. Notes that, under normal circumstances, are handled quietly within a school system's own protocols and rarely make their way back to an extended family member unless something forces the door open. Miss Renwick told me Lily had, on 2 occasions, fallen asleep at her desk in the middle of the school day, and once, when gently woken, had flinched so violently that she knocked her pencil case to the floor and immediately apologized 3 times before anyone had said a single word to her. Sensitive, Priya had told me. Some kids are sensitive. I have thought about that phrase more than almost any other in this entire ordeal, because it was such an efficient little lie. True enough on its surface to survive a mother-in-law's passing curiosity, false enough underneath to hide something no child should have had to carry alone. The third thing was money, And money is the thing I understand best in this world. I began noticing that Daniel and Priya, who I had personally rescued from financial ruin on at least 4 separate occasions, were suddenly taking vacations I had not been told about. A long weekend in Charleston. A week in Cancun over spring break, which I only learned about because Lily's teacher mentioned Lily had missed a week of 2nd grade. When I asked Daniel about it, gently, over coffee, he laughed and said, "Mom, we're fine now. Things have turned around." I wanted so badly to believe that things had turned around that I did not ask the obvious question. Turned around how? It was my dear friend Marguerite Okafor who finally said out loud what I had been circling for months. Marguerite and I had been friends since our children were in diapers together, and she is the kind of woman who says true things at exactly the moment you are least prepared to hear them, which is precisely why I trust her more than almost anyone alive. We were having our Thursday lunch at the diner on 5th Street, the one with the pie case by the register, and I was telling her, almost as small talk, that Daniel and Priya seemed to be doing well financially all of a sudden. Marguerite set down her fork. "Nora," she said, "have you looked at your own accounts lately? Really looked?" I told her of course I had. I balanced my checkbook every month, the old-fashioned way, the way my mother taught me. But Marguerite's husband had been a bank branch manager for 30 years before he retired, and she said something that lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. "Checkbooks tell you what you wrote down. They don't tell you what someone else wrote down for you." I remember exactly how that lunch smelled. Bacon grease and burnt coffee and the cherry pie under glass by the register that neither of us ever ordered but always admired on our way out. Marguerite has known me since our sons were in the same stroller-pushing group at the Methodist Church nursery, back when both our husbands were still alive, and neither of us had any idea what the next 30 years would ask of us. She is not a woman who speaks lightly, which is exactly why her words landed the way they did. "Nora," she said again, when I did not answer right away, "I'm not trying to frighten you. I'm trying to love you the way a real friend loves you, which means I have to say the thing you don't want to hear." She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and her hand was cold from her iced tea glass, and I remember that detail with a strange clarity, the way you remember unimportant things at the exact moment something important is happening. Thomas saw this exact pattern more times than either of us would like in 30 years at that bank. It's never the strangers who do it. It's the ones closest to you. Every single time. I told her she was wrong, that Daniel would never, that she didn't know him the way I knew him, and she nodded, patient, the way you nod at someone who is not yet ready to hear you, and she said only, "Then prove me wrong. Look at the statements. If I'm wrong, buy me a slice of that pie we never order, and I'll never bring it up again." I did not know, walking out of that diner into the gray Ohio afternoon, that I would owe her considerably more than a slice of pie. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking of small things. Daniel asking me, 18 months earlier, to add him as an authorized user on one of my credit cards just for emergencies. I kept thinking of the time he'd asked me to sign what he called a power of attorney form. Just in case, Mom, you know, so I can help you with things as you get older, and how I had signed it in his kitchen without truly reading every line, because it is Daniel, because he is my son, because you do not read the fine print when your own child hands you a pen. The decision to act did not arrive as a single dramatic moment. It arrived the way most important decisions do in a life like mine. Quietly, over a period of weeks, hardening like concrete. I did not decide to destroy my son. I decided, simply, that I would no longer be blind in my own life. A woman who has survived widowhood, raised a child alone, and worked 42 years cleaning up the wounds other adults caused is not a woman who panics. She gathers information. She waits for a clear picture before she moves. I called Marguerite's husband, Thomas, retired now but still sharp as a tack, and asked him, as a favor, to walk me through exactly what a power of attorney document could and could not permit someone to do. Thomas came to my kitchen table on a Wednesday evening with his reading glasses pushed up into his gray hair and a yellow legal pad under his arm, the same way he must have carried documents into 100 nervous customers' living rooms over 30 years at that bank. He asked me first, gently, whether I had a copy of the document I'd signed, and when I produced it from the drawer where I keep important papers, he read it twice. Slowly, his finger tracing each clause the way a man reads something he already suspects is bad news but wants to be certain before he says so out loud. Nora, he said finally, taking off his glasses, this isn't the limited, springing power of attorney you'd typically sign just in case. This is a broad, immediately effective document. It gives Daniel authority to move funds, open and close accounts, and act on your behalf right now, today, not only if you become incapacitated. He tapped the paragraph with 2 fingers. This clause here. This was added or expanded sometime after the version most attorneys would draft as standard. Do you remember signing an amendment or a second version of this? I did not remember signing a second version. I remembered signing one document, quickly, at Daniel's kitchen table, while Lily colored at my elbow and Daniel refilled my coffee and told me it was just paperwork. Mom, nothing to worry about. I had not read every line. I had trusted the hand that placed the pen in mine. Thomas was quiet for a long moment before he spoke again. I'm going to say this as your friend and not as a banker, he said. You need your own bank statements, mailed to this house, unopened by anyone but you, going back at least a year. And you need to see them before you say one word to Daniel about any of this. Once he knows you're looking, whatever's happening either stops leaving a trail or accelerates. You want to see the truth while it's still moving in the open. I want to tell you about the moment I opened those statements, because it is the moment that changed the shape of everything that came after. I sat at my kitchen table with 3 months of statements from my primary savings account, the one holding what remained of my late husband's small pension payout and my own retirement, and I found 4 transfers I did not authorize. $3,000 in March, $4,500 in April, $2,800 in May, and another $5,000 just 11 days before that lunch with Marguerite. Almost $15,300 in 4 months moved to an account I did not recognize, under authority I had unknowingly signed away in my own son's kitchen. Lies. All lies. Every vacation. Every things have turned around. All of it built on money I had earned scrubbing skinned knees and comforting frightened children for 42 years. I did not confront Daniel. I want to be honest with you about why, because this is where a woman's strength is often misunderstood as coldness. I did not confront him because confrontation, at that stage, would have only warned him to cover his tracks better. I needed proof that could not be argued away over a kitchen table. I needed a lawyer. I found her through Thomas, a woman named Diane Castellano, who specializes in elder financial exploitation, a phrase I had never in my life expected to need. Diane's office smelled like burnt coffee and had a single dying plant on the windowsill, and I liked her immediately because she did not flinch when I told her my story. She had heard it 100 times, in 100 different kitchens, with 100 different names standing in for Daniel's. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, I need you to understand something. This is not uncommon, and it is not your fault. Financial elder abuse happens most often not to isolated, friendless women, but to women exactly like you. Women who trusted the person closest to them completely. She said the words financial elder abuse, the way a doctor says a diagnosis, plainly, without cruelty, but without softening it either. I appreciated that. I had spent enough of my life softening hard truths for other people. I did not need it done for me. Diane's office had a single dying plant on the windowsill and a wall of framed diplomas that had gone slightly crooked, as though she had hung them once, years ago, and never had the time to straighten them since. She asked me detailed questions I had not thought to ask myself. Not just how much money had moved, but when each transfer occurred relative to conversations I'd had with Daniel, whether he had ever asked me to sign anything else just as a formality, whether Priya had ever been present when financial topics came up, and whether she steered those conversations in any particular direction. I found myself answering questions I did not know the answers to until the moment she asked them. The way a good nurse asks a patient about symptoms the patient did not realize were connected until someone finally lines them up in order. Here is what I want you to understand before we go any further, Diane said, closing her legal pad. You are allowed to protect yourself without destroying your family. Those are not opposites, even though it will feel, at times, like they are. My job is to make sure that whatever your son and daughter-in-law choose to do next, they can no longer do it using your money, your trust, or your good name as their instrument. What they choose to do after that is entirely up to them, not to us. Diane and I built a plan with 2 stages, and I remember thinking, even in the depths of my hurt, and this will make you smile, that it felt like planning a surgery. Precise, sequential, no room for improvisation once it began. Stage 1. I revoked the power of attorney immediately, quietly, through Diane's office, and opened a new account at a different bank entirely, one Daniel had never heard of, moving what remained of my funds before another transfer could occur. Diane also helped me place a fraud alert and request the full transaction history going back 2 full years, not just 4 months, because she suspected, correctly, as it turned out, that the pattern went back much further than I knew. Stage 2. Documentation. Diane instructed me to say nothing to Daniel or Priya, to continue our Sunday dinners exactly as before, to smile, to ask about Lily's school play, to compliment Priya's new kitchen curtains, all while quietly gathering every piece of paper that told the true story of the last several years. I am ashamed to admit how easily I performed that role. 42 years of nursing teaches you how to keep your face calm while your hands do the necessary work underneath. It was during that performance, 3 Sundays into it, to be exact, that I overheard the conversation that changed everything, the conversation that would eventually put handcuffs on my son's wrists. I had gone to the kitchen for more iced tea, and through the swinging door, I heard Daniel and Priya in the dining room, their voices low, but not low enough. "She still thinks it's her idea to help us," Priya said, and I heard the particular laugh she uses when she believes something is clever rather than cruel. "As long as she keeps thinking that, we're fine. Once Lily's college fund kicks in, we can just fold it into the account anyway. She'll never look that closely." And then Daniel's voice, quieter, almost, hesitant. "I don't love doing it this way, Pry. She's my mother." And Priya's answer, flat as a closed door, "She's also sitting on money doing nothing while we're drowning. She'll be fine. She always lands on her feet." She'll be fine. She always lands on her feet. As if 42 years of double shifts and coupon clipping was a magic trick I performed for my own entertainment, rather than the reason my son had a childhood with shoes on his feet at all. I stood very still behind that swinging door, the picture sweating against my palms, and I listened to them continue, because once you have heard the first ugly sentence, you find you need to hear how deep the ugliness goes. Priya was talking now about the minivan loan, the one my credit had absorbed the damage for after 3 missed payments, and she said, almost bored, "We'll just let her keep covering that too. She won't make a fuss. She never has." Daniel said something I could not quite catch, and Priya laughed, that particular laugh, and said, "Danny, she's a 71-year-old widow with a pension and a paid-off house. What is she going to do? Cut us off? She loves Lily too much for that." And there it was, the true architecture of the thing, laid bare in 4 sentences over a dinner table I had helped pay for. Not malice exactly, in her mind. Just arithmetic. I was a resource to be managed, the way you manage a utility bill and love. My love, Lily's need for me, was simply the mechanism that guaranteed the resource would never object too loudly. I stood in that kitchen with the iced tea pitcher sweating in my hands, and I felt something settle in me, cold and clear as glass. Not rage. Rage is loud, and loud things get noticed. What I felt was clarity. I walked back into that dining room, set down the pitcher, smiled, and asked Lily how her book report on penguins had gone. Dramatic irony, my dear listener, is a gift you can only receive in silence. The countermove came next, and it is the part of this story I am proudest of, because it is the part where I stopped being a woman things happened to and became a woman who made things happen. With Diane's guidance, I retained full documentation of the unauthorized transfers, obtained certified copies of the power of attorney with a forensic notation of when the broader authority language had been quietly added. A detail Daniel had not disclosed to me at signing, and opened a locked, separate trust account in Lily's name specifically, one that neither Daniel nor Priya could touch, funded, with a portion of what remained, so that whatever came next, that little girl's future was protected regardless of what happened to her parents. I also, on Diane's advice, installed a small, legal recording notice on my home phone line should any future calls require documentation. And I began keeping a written log, dated and timed, of every strange remark, every unexplained vacation, every moment that had once seemed small and now looked like evidence. There was one more piece to the countermove that I have not yet told you, because it is the piece that still makes my hands unsteady when I think of it. Diane advised me to update my own estate documents entirely. My will, my healthcare directive, the beneficiary designations on what remained of my accounts. Removing Daniel as my sole power of attorney and replacing him, at least temporarily, with Marguerite, who agreed without a second's hesitation, the way real friends agree to carry weight that isn't theirs simply because you asked. I don't want this to be permanent, I told Diane, and I meant it. I want it to be until I understand what I'm actually dealing with. Diane nodded and said, "That's exactly the right instinct. Protection now doesn't have to mean punishment forever. But you cannot protect anyone, including Daniel, from a decision you haven't yet finished making, and you can't make that decision honestly while you're still exposed. I want to pause here and tell you something important. None of this, not one document, not $1 moved to safety, was born of vengeance. Diane said something to me in her office that I have never forgotten. You are not trying to destroy your son, Mrs. Whitfield. You are trying to make sure that whatever choice he continues to make, it can no longer be made using you as the unwitting instrument. That distinction mattered to me. It still does. I had planned to let this counter-move play out slowly, the way Diane and I had mapped it. A calm confrontation, followed by a civil restitution agreement, followed, if necessary, by legal recourse through the proper channels. I did not plan for Lily. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. I had picked her up from school because Priya had a dentist appointment, something I had done dozens of times before without incident. We were in my kitchen, and I was helping her with a worksheet on rounding numbers to the nearest 10, and she went very quiet in that particular way I had learned to notice, the stillness before the hawk's shadow. Then she set down her pencil and looked at me with an expression far too old for her face. "Grandma," she said, "I want to tell you something very terrible about my parents." I put my own pencil down. I kept my voice as level as I have ever kept anything in my life, because I understood, instinctively, that whatever came next would determine whether this child ever trusted an adult with the truth again. I did not reach for her right away, though every instinct in me wanted to pull her into my arms. 42 years in a school nurse's office teaches you that children who are finally working up the courage to speak need room, not pressure, and that the wrong movement at the wrong moment can close a door that took enormous bravery to open even a crack. "You can tell me anything, sweetheart," I said. "I promise I will believe you, whatever it is. You are not in any trouble, and neither is anyone else, just for you telling me the truth." She looked at her hands for a long moment, picking at a thread on her sleeve, and then she looked back up at me, and I will remember the particular color of her eyes in that light for the rest of my life. Not frightened exactly anymore, but resolved, the way a much older person looks when they have finally decided that a secret has become heavier than the fear of telling it. "Okay," she said. "Okay, Grandma." What she told me, in the careful, halting way children tell you things they have been taught not to say, was this: that on nights her parents fought about money, and there had been many, many nights. Her father would sometimes leave the house for hours and lock her in her room for her own safety, she was told, sometimes without dinner, sometimes for so long she had learned to sleep on the floor by the door so she would hear when someone finally came home. That once, when she cried too loudly during one of these lock-ins, Priya had told her that if she said anything to anyone, they would send her to live somewhere far away where nobody loved her at all. That the bruise she had shown her second-grade teacher last spring, the one explained as she fell off her bike, had actually come from her father grabbing her arm hard enough to leave marks when she would not stop crying about being locked in. I want to be careful here, because I promised you the truth and not sensationalism. I do not know, even now, the full scope of everything Lily endured, and I will not pretend to more certainty than I have. But I know what a 6-year-old's face looks like when she is finally being believed. And I know that once she started talking, the fear that had kept her silent for so long simply broke open, and she could not stop. I did not scream. I did not cry in front of her, though God knows I wanted to. I told her she had done exactly the right thing by telling me that none of it was her fault, not one particle of it, and that grown-ups were going to help her now. Then I walked into the other room, and I called 911. I gave the dispatcher everything, calmly, precisely, the way 42 years of emergency room hallways had trained me to speak under pressure. Lily's disclosure, the timeline as best I understood it, the address, my relationship to the child, my willingness to keep her with me until someone arrived. My hands were shaking by the time I hung up the phone, though my voice, thank God, had not been. I went back into the kitchen where Lily sat exactly where I had left her, and I told her, honestly, that I had called some people whose job was to help keep children safe, and that they would probably want to talk with her too, gently, and that she did not have to be scared, because I would not leave her side for one single minute. 20 minutes later, though it felt like both an instant and an eternity, the way true crises always do, 2 patrol cars pulled into my driveway, their lights turning slow, silent circles against my living room curtains. Officer Renata Cole, a woman with kind, tired eyes who I would come to be deeply grateful for in the weeks that followed, came to the door first, alone, and introduced herself softly before she ever mentioned a badge. She sat with Lily and me at my kitchen table, at Lily's own eye level, and let Lily choose whether to hold my hand or not while she asked her gentle, careful questions, the kind designed not to lead a child toward any particular answer, but simply to let whatever was true find its own way out. A second team, following the standard protocols for a disclosure of this nature, went to Daniel and Priya's house to speak with them directly, separately, while Officer Cole stayed with us. I remember Lily asking me, at one point, in a whisper, whether her parents were going to be very mad at her. I told her the truth, because I had promised myself I would never again let a lie, however kind it seemed in the moment. Be the thing standing between this family and the light. They might feel a lot of things, I said. But none of those feelings are your fault, and none of them are yours to carry. You told the truth. That was brave, and it was right, and I am so proud of you I could burst. I will not pretend the hours that followed were anything but the hardest of my life. There is no version of watching your own son led out of a house in handcuffs, even a house you no longer trust him to run, that does not tear something loose inside you. I stood on my own porch because Lily and I had gone there together at Officer Cole's suggestion, and I watched Daniel's face when he saw me. It was not anger I saw first. It was recognition. The look of a man realizing, all at once, that his mother now knew everything. Not just the money, but this too, and that there was no version of any of it he could talk his way out of. Priya was arrested that same evening, following her own interview, once the pattern Lily described. Corroborated in part by the school nurse's records of prior bruises and absences, records I would later learn my own former colleagues had quietly flagged months earlier without knowing what to do with their suspicions, became impossible to dismiss as a misunderstanding. The reckoning, in the days that followed, showed me exactly who each of them truly was, and I will not pretend it was simple. Priya, through her attorney, denied everything categorically, framed Lily's disclosure as confusion, framed the financial transfers as gifts freely given by a doting grandmother, and showed, in every statement she released, not one flicker of the woman who used to send me thoughtful birthday cards. She broke in the wrong direction, toward denial, toward blame, toward casting her own daughter as an unreliable narrator of her own suffering. At the bail hearing, I watched her from 3 rows back, and she never once turned around to look for me, though I know she knew exactly where I was sitting. Her attorney argued that Lily was an impressionable child who may have absorbed language from a contentious household dispute, and I remember thinking, with a coldness that surprised even me, that this woman had spent years managing my trust, the way she managed a household budget, and she intended to manage this courtroom the very same way, right up until the evidence made that impossible. It did become impossible. The prosecutor, a soft-spoken but relentless woman named Assistant District Attorney Fatima Bello, laid out the timeline methodically. The 2 prior concern notes filed by Miss Renwick and the school counselor, the pediatrician's record of the bicycle bruise with a notation that its pattern was inconsistent with the explanation given, and Lily's own forensic interview, conducted separately by a trained child specialist using techniques designed to avoid leading questions, which corroborated the substance of what she had told me at my kitchen table almost word for word. Priya's attorney's argument did not survive contact with that much consistency. Daniel broke differently, and this is the part of the story I still turn over most in my mind. 3 days after his arraignment, out on bail with conditions that kept him away from Lily entirely, he came to my porch. Not my door, my porch, because Officer Cole had advised me it was my right to decide whether to let him closer than that. And he stood there in the rain without an umbrella, and he did not defend himself. I should have stopped it the first time, he said. I told myself I was protecting her by not making it worse. I was just protecting myself from having to be the one who stopped it. He did not ask me to forgive him. He asked me, instead, whether Lily was safe and whether she hated him, and I told him the truth. That she was safe, that children rarely hate as cleanly as adults imagine, and that whatever came next between us would depend entirely on what he did from that day forward, not on what he said standing on my porch in the rain. I saw him once more before the plea agreement was finalized, at a supervised meeting arranged through his attorney to discuss the restitution terms, and he looked, for the first time since he was a boy of 9 standing at his father's funeral, genuinely afraid. Not of jail, I think, though that fear was surely present too, but of the specific, permanent shape of what he had allowed to happen under his own roof. I keep thinking about the chicken thighs, he said suddenly, apropos of nothing, and when I asked what on earth he meant, he said, "You told me once you just preferred rice. I found out years later from Aunt Marguerite that wasn't true. And I keep thinking, how did I grow up watching you sacrifice like that and still let this happen to my own daughter?" I did not have an answer for him that day, and I am not certain there is one. Some failures do not have tidy explanations. They simply have consequences and the work of living honestly with them afterward. I want to tell you what happened to the money, because I promised you precision, and I intend to keep that promise to the very end. The forensic accounting Diane commissioned eventually traced $31,400 in unauthorized transfers across 22 months. Nearly double what I had first discovered, spread across small enough increments, month after month, that no single transaction alone would ever have raised an alarm at the bank. That is the particular cruelty of this kind of theft. It is not a single dramatic robbery. It is 1,000 small permissions granted under the name of trust until trust itself has been quietly hollowed out from the inside. Restitution was ordered as part of the legal proceedings, structured payments that will take years to complete, and every dollar is now going, at my direction, into the locked trust I established in Lily's name, the one neither of her parents can touch, meant for her education and her care, regardless of how the rest of this unfolds. Diane helped me structure it so that even if Daniel's payments lapse, the courts have mechanisms to garnish and enforce. Because I did not want this trust to depend on the good faith of people who had, for 2 years, shown me exactly how much their good faith was worth. Priya's case moved toward trial, and as of this recording, she remains free on a modified bail arrangement pending that trial, with no contact permitted with Lily under any circumstance. Daniel, facing lesser charges tied directly to the financial exploitation and separately to a charge of child endangerment for his role in the confinement Lily described, accepted a plea agreement that included supervised, therapist-mediated visitation only, contingent on completing a court-ordered parenting and accountability program. Visitation, I have insisted, and the court has agreed, cannot resume at all until professionals confirm it is safe for Lily, not convenient for Daniel. I sat in on that hearing, and when the judge asked if there was anything the family wished to add, I stood, and I said only this: my granddaughter deserves a childhood built on truth, even when the truth is unbearable. I will not trade her safety for anyone's comfort, including my own son's. The judge nodded slowly, and I sat back down, and I did not look at Daniel, because I did not need to see his face to know what was on it. Lily lives with me now, in the house I once nearly lost to a warehouse accident and a mortgage I paid alone for 30 years, the house that money I earned scrubbing knees eventually secured outright. She sleeps with her door open. She runs to greet me again, the way she used to, socks sliding on the hardwood floor, and some nights I sit outside her room after she's asleep, and I think about the woman I was at, her age is mother's age. 31, alone, certain the world had already taken everything it intended to take from me, and I think about how wrong I was. The world does not stop testing you at 71. It simply gives you, if you are lucky, and if you have kept your receipts, both literal and otherwise, the tools to answer that testing with something other than despair. There are mornings, still, when I catch myself setting the table for 4 out of old habit before I remember it is only Lily and me now, and in those mornings the grief is not simple. I grieve the son I raised and the son who let this happen, and I have learned, slowly, that both of those men can be the same person, and that loving him does not obligate me to hand him back the keys to anything before he has earned the right to hold them again. Marguerite says I have changed since all of this, and when I ask her how, she says, "You used to apologize for taking up space, Nora. You don't do that anymore." I think she is right. I think somewhere between that swinging kitchen door and that courtroom bench, I stopped being a woman who quietly absorbed whatever was placed on her shoulders and became, finally, at 71 years old, a woman who decides for herself what she will carry and what she will set down for good. Lily asked me last week, out of nowhere, while we were planting tomatoes in the little garden bed behind my house, whether I was mad at her for telling me the terrible thing about her parents. I put down my trowel and I told her the truest thing I know. "Sweetheart," I said, "you are the bravest person I have ever met in my entire life, and I include myself in that count. You didn't break this family. You are the reason what was broken finally has a chance to be mended, even if it takes a very long time." She thought about that for a while, the way she thinks about most things now, carefully, like a girl who has learned that words matter more than most adults ever tell children they do. And then she went back to patting soil around a tomato seedling. And I let her, because some healing does not need more words. It just needs time and safety and someone willing to stay. I do not tell you this story for pity, and I do not tell it for revenge, though I understand if parts of it feel like both. I tell it because somewhere out there is another grandmother noticing that her granddaughter has stopped running to the door, noticing money moving in directions she cannot quite explain, telling herself it is nothing, telling herself she must be imagining it. I am here to tell you, you are very likely not imagining it. Look closely. Keep your documents. Trust the children who finally find the courage to speak, even when. Especially when. What they say is the most terrible thing you have ever heard in your life. And know this, in your bones, the way I finally came to know it in mine. Quiet dignity is not the absence of power. It is power, patiently waiting for its moment. Sometimes, in the evenings, I sit on that same porch where Daniel once stood in the rain, and I look out at the street where those 2 patrol cars once turned their slow, silent circles of light against my curtains, and I think about how ordinary that street looks now, how it gives no indication at all of what passed through it. That, I have come to believe, is the truest thing about a life like mine. The worst mornings and the most ordinary mornings occupy the exact same square of pavement. What determines which kind of morning you are living is not the street. It is what you decided to do the last time someone handed you a truth too heavy to hold alone. If this story stayed with you, I would love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? And from where in the world are you listening? Don't forget to like and subscribe, please. There is so much more waiting for you. With love and respect. Until next time.